Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where your location is. Uh, Go ahead and get started here. And if we have questions, we'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So it would be great if you could hold them there and enter them into the questions area of the invite or the meeting. That'd be great and much appreciated. So again, today we'll talk about GitHub Copilot and unlocking some of its capabilities or core capabilities and understanding of what Copilot is. I am David Pitcher, a principal consultant with Atmosera. I have over 30 years of industry experience from a software engineering perspective and also DevOps practices, and played in many other roles within the software industry or life cycle, so well versed in all disciplines. And I'm going to introduce a counterpart, Joe Kostovich, to give you a little bit of a background on Atmosera and some other formalities towards the end of this session. So if you hear him speaking, you'll get an idea of who he is and how he's here to help facilitate the conversation.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Kostovich, DevOps Practice Lead here at Atmosera. Just wanted to give you a quick introduction of who Atmosera is so you kind of understand who's talking to you today. So Atmosera is a expert MSP within the Microsoft system, Azure especially, but we also do professional services as well, everything from security and DevOps to app modernization and data and AI, which will be the topic for today. So big partners with GitHub as well, a partner of the year last year. So happy to speak more with you on this, and glad everyone's here today. So pass back to David.
Thank you, Joe. So from an agenda, we're going to do a quick overview or Copilot introduction or refresher for those of you that are not familiar with it and looking to get some baseline. Then we're going to talk about what makes Copilot special and some core features and functionality of how it actually helps software developers become more efficient. We'll look at it from the lens of a developer's perspective, some key things that will help you get max value out of Copilot and developing code. Then finally, we'll go through a live demo and take Copilot through its paces within the VS Code IDE. And then finally, a Q&A session and a review of an offer concluding on the end of the presentation here. And again, please enter questions as you have them, and when we get to the Q&A, we'll go through those and answer. So what is Copilot? So Copilot really is an AI coding assistant for software developers. And why is that important? AI-assisted development is really reshaping how software is being developed today. AI-assisted development of tools like Copilot bring in suggestions for a line of code, blocks of code, or entirely net new code bases, where that AI assistant can come in and generate all the code for you, allowing you for an experience of much faster and with fewer errors. Take the human out of the picture and typographic errors, things like that. We can leverage Copilot to assist in code reviews and identifying potential bugs, security vulnerabilities, style inconsistencies, or higher code quality, right? So we're able to leverage that AI assistant instead of another person to accelerate the code review process. Generating test cases. We all know from a developer perspective, right, that's the least desired or one of the least desirable things from a software engineering perspective. Running and automating those tests and even predicting areas of a code base that are likely to contain defects. GitHub Copilot can also assist with identifying bugs more efficiently, especially in your debugging cycle, being able to automatically configure your debugger and launch the debugger, step through and access the code base and provide suggested solutions to resolve any type of anomalies or errors being seen. GitHub's AI models are continuously being updated with new learnings from data and user interactions to improve their accuracy and usefulness over time. So it's not a static product at all. It's a continuous evolving element. Um, Copilot in itself is supported by GitHub's central AI model, so we don't have a choice of a singular model. There's actually 5 or more models, I believe, currently available to choose. Each model can be used for specific targeted results, and again, designed towards increasing productivity based on the type of prompts and questions asked for Copilot. The core capabilities or key features of Copilot I'd like to cover. The number one thing that we all think and talk about and where all the buzz is around code completion. Copilot streamlines the coding process by providing intelligent contextual suggestions for lines of code, functions or classes or methods, and entire large blocks of code. It reduces a lot of repetitive tasks and accelerates development. Building out core scaffolding for new classes as an example, takes your traditional autocomplete or in the terms of VS Code or Visual Studio IntelliSense up a whole nother level and can auto-generate code snippets that are well-formed, styled, named appropriately within a certain context and generates a useful code base. Whereas the traditional as just giving you the next statement of a var or something along those lines, or a class type. The code suggestions or code completion with Copilot is much more robust. With coding assistance, we can look at it in the terms of IDE integration and making sure that you're staying productive and you're staying within the tool in which you're actually writing code. So this is where Copilot Chat and Copilot files comes into play, is again that direct integration with IDE, providing a interactive chat environment that is context aware for how your IDE is set up. So it knows about your project, it knows about all the files in your project, what files you have open, what you're actually working on, and also other aspects of the repository itself, such as pull requests and previous commits, issues, and etc. The other element in terms of Copilot integration is at the command line. A lot of stuff these days now when we're doing development, there's a lot of work at the command line. It could be PowerShell, it could be Azure CLI, it could be Git, it could be GitHub. Again, there's many command line tools there. The integration into your command line with Copilot is there and helps with jogging the memory, if you will, of what command does what, because again, we're being taxed with a lot of information and a lot of things they're trying to remember. And with Copilot CLI, this can accelerate that process and build out prompts for us. So a typical one that I typically end up getting caught with is how to log into Azure using a service principal over the CLI. So I can easily ask in a natural language Copilot to generate that command and execute it. Other capabilities is looking at pull requests. How many of us that are writing software, doing commits and creating pull requests, right? It's an activity that we do not necessarily enjoy, is writing that pull request summary. Copilot can automatically generate great summaries. Understanding what all the changes are in the code on a pull request, highlighting those changes, articulating them, and describing them, which makes it much easier and faster for reviewers to look at and understanding complex changes to the code base on a specific pull request. Enhancements to the GitHub UI are done by enabling with Copilot as well. So here we have complete access to documentation and the code repositories that we can use and ask Copilot for assistance and understanding more of a GitHub specific configuration. GitHub Actions as another example where the embedded nature of Copilot in the UI helps. Even with, say, taking a look at some configuration aspects of Copilot in the GitHub UI is around content exclusion. So I can specifically develop and ask Copilot to help exclude content that could be sensitive and have that configured at the organization level or at a repo level for Copilot. So we talked about the IDE integration, right, and how great that is into VS Code. So how do we get productive with that and get some acceleration and value? And this comes in where we talk about participants and or slash commands. So slash commands are there both to help with efficiency and precision for developers interacting with Copilot chat. They provide basic shortcuts, right? Of instead of having to write more detailed text or type it, the slash command accelerates what that is and allows you to swiftly insert boilerplate code, standard functions, or even navigate through complex code bases with a simple slash command. So if I do a slash explain, I could take a file that's added already there and it can enumerate everything in that file. I don't have to ask for anything specific. So the time to enter the chat prompt to the time to getting a response is much faster. From Copilot on the CLI side, and I kind of already touched on this, integrating within the terminal to provide more of a chat interface at the command line and provide value of discovery in terms of commands, parameters, other options, right? So if you're more of a Linux person and trying to figure out sed, awk, grep, etc., and the command parameters for that, very easy to bring that in, ask Copilot to give you examples or generate the commands for you. The third and final core integration aspect is what I call in-file, or what's referred to as in-file code selection. This is where we're leveraging typically Copilot file in the VS Code IDE, and this is really just working on more of your inline prompt and text. So you're working on a file, you need specific changes to a function or a class, or do an implementation for a property. You can easily go right click within the IDE, use a slash command or enter a prompt and have Copilot use that context of what you have selected for your section and generate any type of assisted code there that you're asking for. Key to this is improving velocity and quality. So an example could be, say if I'm doing C# development, asking Copilot to generate error handling for a function or class that I have, and then Copilot can come back with recommendations for try-catch statements and then catch blocks for every specific exception type that can be thrown, and bring that in, generate the code for it, and then even help with defining the error messages. So this is more of a interactive in-file experience. So what problems do we have with AI? It's not perfect. The large language models in which Copilot is based on are not perfect. They have challenges and can sometimes lead folks astray. One of the key things here is what we refer to as AI hallucinations, and is typically exposed as suggestions from Copilot or from any type of large language model of factually incorrect or seemingly made up information, or essentially the AI is imagining code that does not exist or is not relevant to the current context in which you're seeking assistance with. Copilot can sometimes generate code that appears really plausible. It looks like it should work, but it doesn't work and it doesn't fit your intended functionality. A lot of the times this is due to limitations of the training data or gaps in that training data and interpretations of a prompt. So poor prompts usually result in poor results. Challenges with the hallucinations, if you're not careful or caught, and reevaluating everything that you get out of Copilot, is that in bugs in your code and worst case scenarios, potential security vulnerabilities that get committed. Another challenge is around solution repetition, or repetition of the same recommended suggestion or response. This is typically a side effect of hallucinations. You're asking Copilot to give you a recommendation, and you keep changing slightly the verbiage or your prompt, and you get the same recommendation over and over and over again. Another variation of that could be more of a AI loop. So it's not necessarily repeating the same thing, but it's repeating 3 or 4 different suggestions, always the same, and it's just stuck in this loop no matter what you do. So this is where we'd have to, again, work on changing the prompt, or perhaps even changing the selected model. So a other large problem, or I should say large problem, common problem, are non-optimal responses. So this is where we have a correct response that comes back from Copilot, but may not be the most code efficient or optimized response. So we can think of that as if I get a response back from Copilot that does an if else type effect, right? Where that could easily be changed out with a switch statement. Or if we're looking at a specific type of algorithm, the algorithm performing poorly, and there's better choices for that. So it's just being aware of and understanding, again, for non-optimal responses, readdressing and probably changing or re-architecting your prompt. So how do we get away from these hallucinations, or avoid them, or try to have a reduced occurrence of them? This is what we look at in terms of prompt engineering. So prompt engineering really is a concept where we're defining prompts that contain the appropriate level of information and context. Right, so essentially the art and science of crafting human language written prompts that guide Copilot to generate accurate and useful code suggestions. Right? Copilot can't read minds. Right? It's not directly attached to my head, plugged into my brain, and understanding exactly what I'm thinking. So we have to be able to provide Copilot enough information in the prompt to get us to where we need to go. So think of prompts as providing clear instructions or setting the stage so Copilot understands exactly what we're looking for. So this can like equate out to how we write functional specifications, right? We need to build out well-crafted prompts that have the right level of context. That might be including files, including examples, etc., and kind of where I touched on before, functional specifications, and either building in, say, acceptance criteria, etc., right? So give the Copilot prompt boundaries, limitations, examples, etc., on how it can improve itself. So if you're into the realm of working, another example of kind of how that works is, and from a software perspective and engineering, is working with Gherkin and being able to write Gherkin statements to drive how software should function. It removes ambiguity and adds the detailed clarity. And one final thing on that is on the prompts as we write them, we may need to switch which model that is being used by Copilot. So if we start with Copilot ChatGPT as the model, and we're getting incorrect responses, maybe we should choose Claude 3.5 Sonnet, or maybe even looking at Gemini. So we have that choice, right, which suits our case, and knowing that and providing that guidance is extremely helpful. So how do we do that in our prompting? So there's typically a few styles that we can look at, And the first one is what was referred to as zero-shot prompting, where we just instruct Copilot to go perform a task or give us a response or a suggestion, and not providing it any examples or any type of baseline or constraints. The one shot is taking that up a level where we provide a single example. Then we move to few shot, we provide one or more examples or continue on submitting prompts. And then finally, the step-by-step piece is strategically breaking down what you're looking for or getting from a response back into small incremental steps. So basically, teaching or training the Copilot to understand what you're looking for. So prefixing, here's an example of what I'm looking for in terms of a field. It needs to be of this type, or I need to use this particular API. I need to leverage a particular NuGet package. Those kinds of things are when we say from an example, and you continuously prompt and improve on the message or the results that come out. The key takeaway here is, again, prompt engineering is the key to good success with getting the results that you're looking for out of Copilot and eliminating hallucinations. So big best practices here is think about providing references in your prompts. So can you reference a specific piece of code, a file in your code base, or an example or a snippet of code to help provide Copilot with some additional context. Writing clear instructions, removing any type of ambiguity in it. If you ask to write a code block, specify the language if it's not explicitly clear already, or if you're not using a previous chunk of code, if you have a blank slate. Split up big tasks. This is the step-by-step. That significantly improves accuracy and quality of the responses. And then there's times when you may sit and have a lot of files that you want Copilot to examine or bring in as context, a lot of information that it needs to read through, interpret, understand, and then go out and generate a response. Sometimes that takes time. So have some patience when Copilot takes long to respond, instead of canceling or rewriting the prompt. And then finally, whenever you do get a suggestion and you incorporate it, really test those suggestions, revalidate them, make sure that you're not getting faulty code or more of a code base that is not performant. So what is it like from a developer perspective day to day? One of the key things here is not having to jump out to a web browser to go search for a problem or search with an error code that you found or get, or try to understand. I might be doing some Golang programming and I've got this package. I need to understand what are all the parameters for the package and what type of object it's returning, right? Instead of having to go out to Google to do that, I can use Copilot Chat and give it my prompt, tell it what I'm looking for, and have the option to explain or suggest a piece of code, right? Typically, when we go over a browser, right, we get hundreds of responses, and a lot of those times, those responses are tied to a bunch of Reddits or Stack Overflow pieces, which again require a lot more browsing and continue exploration. Copilot gives you that straight up right into the IDE, right where you're actually working, and the ability to get even potential code snippets that you can jump right in and lock into your code base. So a good example for that is I'm working with, in my code, a messaging system, and I need to work with Azure Service Bus class, and I need to understand a specific method, or I don't know the methods because it's new to me. I can ask Copilot Chat to explain that, and it will bring back suggestions and recommendations of using the class, what the methods are, what type of parameters it takes, and potential examples of code based on what is already in my code library. New project code onboarding. So this is a good way to accelerate generating a lot of scaffolding. We'll see an example of this in the demo portion of being able to generate large amounts of code and code blocks that accelerate starting of a project. So I can get to that work much faster. Unit tests, right? How many times again do we like writing unit tests? It's very easy for me to go into Copilot, highlight a method implementation, ask Copilot to generate all possible unit tests to make sure I have an appropriate level of code coverage. And then even with the unit test standpoint, I can ask Copilot to generate and the required configuration for the test framework that I'm using and get that set up in VS Code. So a lot of options here on the test side to get more efficiency, allowing you to focus on the core functionality, and Copilot can aid in the assistance of unit testing. Other aspects is, again, how much of it do we enjoy doing inline documentation? So if we're working in C#, what's the XML documentation for a method, a class, or property? Building that in, Copilot is very well versed at doing that and aiding those. And even the full documentation of your project, again, building out a complete README doc or markdown documentation that covers everything within your project and describing that. So this really aids with onboarding of new people into your project, accelerating them in terms of learning and understanding how the project's structured, the code structure, its purpose, functionality, and capabilities. In the end, from a documentation standpoint, Copilot gives us a lot of capabilities in terms of making sure there's a lot more consistency, takes away a lot of the mundane of developing that documentation, less prone to documentation errors, typos, spelling errors, grammatic, incorrect statements, etc. Again, much more on the efficiency and from an accessibility standpoint, accelerating adoption of a code base and understanding by new members of a team. And when we also think of a real world use case from a developer day to day is around code refactoring. Copilot Chat really quickly allows you to refactor code and reduce human error. So a lot of that could be, when we think about refactoring complex code, cases of copy paste or renaming something, moving it around, relocating it to a different file, forgetting the namespace, etc. So those are, again, common things that we can run into. Refactoring on a sorting algorithm. So for example, we've written a bubble sort. I can go to Copilot, ask it to provide recommendations on a more optimum sort and have it come back and give me a quick sort or something else that's much more memory efficient. Using a workspace participant, kind of like a / command, I can do @workspace, and then it gives Copilot the context of my entire code base that is currently loaded in VS Code. I don't have to open up every specific file, etc., or multiple tabs. I could just do @workspace, and Copilot will look at and take into context my entire code tree. On the debugging side, again, very important here that we can use Copilot to generate VS Code launch settings for debugging, start the debugging process, and has access to your full exception and call stack and local variables. So it definitely help with understanding errors or recommending areas in which you want to go and debug. So with that, I'm going to switch over to more of a demo mode here and walk through some scenarios here in which we can take Copilot through its paces. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to start and I want some scaffolding. So I don't have anything here as of today from a scaffolding perspective. So I'm going to open up a terminal, get that available to me, make sure we're ready to go here. And then while that is prepping, I am going to go start. And then within VS Code, I've actually installed the Copilot extensions here. And so I can open up Copilot, or I can open up Copilot file edits. I'm going to just start with Copilot chat. And it brings open a window here. So the first thing I want to show you is, again, what is referred to as participants in Copilot. So if I just hit an @ symbol, I can now summarize or provide significant context for Copilot of how it wants to shape how it looks for information based on my environment. So in this case, I'm going to use workspace. So I'm going to use that as a command. And then we talked about the slash commands. Again, if I do a backslash or slash, I can see what is available to me. It gives me that from an IntelliSense perspective, and I could type new. And then I'm going to build in my prompt here. So what I want to focus on is creating a brand new code structure that is focused on C# and builds out a complete REST API service responsible for scheduling business workflow jobs, has the monitoring of long-running jobs. I can get job status and the ability to rerun failed jobs. I want the API telling it I want it to be hosted in a Docker container. I could say an Azure App Service or many other things, and here I'm giving it the context to go to a Docker container. So the goal here is hopefully we get the project built, all the code built or stubbed in, and a necessary Docker file and other components. So when I talked about before the different models that are available, so ChatGPT 4.0 is the standard. In this case, I'm going to use Claude Sonnet 3.5 because it typically does a little bit better with code generation from raw scratch and no baseline context. So now I'm going to hit send and send that to Copilot. And now we can see Copilot working on the code base here. So now it's actually, well, let me get into the right location here where I want to put save this. Okay. So here's the code that it generated, and it hasn't created it yet, but I can walk through, created a route. I've got my source, I've got my job schedule API, it created a folder for it. It's generated controllers, it generated models, it's generated my services, the base program, and it's also generated a set of tests. Got my Docker file, and I even have a Docker compose YAML in here, a markdown, and the solution file, and a git ignore. So now that I have that, I can easily go in and do a create of the workspace. And it's going to ask me where do I want it. So I'm going to put it within my code repo here. There we go. I'll select that as my parent folder. And then it will actually create the code and move that into my workspace. So while Copilot gives it a minute here, one thing to pick up here, if folks noticed, our next piece is going to be to augment and fix some gaps here in which Copilot generated. So we do have the code, it's in, but one of the things you'll see as we try to load this up is that as VS Code interprets the project in the workspace, what we don't have is we got a solution file, but we don't have any project files, or in the case of C#, CS proj files. So Copilot didn't quite hit the mark perfect, but that's okay. We have the ability to go in and fix that and address it very easily with Copilot, and we're going to use Copilot edits in this case. And so what I want to do is add my solution file to edit. So I'm going to just open up the solution file, and so now it's in here, and I'm going to update and highlight project. Get this over here again, double check there. Now I should be able to get highlight project, and I'm going to go in and ask Copilot to create the CS proj files that are missing. So again, I'm going to use at workspace, and I'm going to ask Copilot to target .NET 8. And it gives me a response, gives me helpful information of what it's going to do. It goes ahead and does that. So it creates the project files that are needed, and then I can see those, I can review them. I'm just going ahead and accept those, and now they're in my code base. So now I have those in, we're good to go with those. So next I want to go in and say, look at my Docker file. All right. I'm not necessarily a container-based developer, and I want it to understand, right? So in this case, it's like, why do we have all these froms in here? My typical learning, if somebody new, we'd want a single from to pull an image and build our image. So now I'm going to ask Copilot, and I'm going to work with files, and I'm going to say done because my working set is finished here. Now I'm going to leverage the Docker file, and I'm going to ask Copilot, again, using workspace, and ask Copilot to explain the details of my Docker file. So I'm going to use this as a learning opportunity. And for this, I'm going to switch from the Claude 3.5 Sonnet back to GPT 4.0. So very simple, workspace / explain. Okay. Not necessarily what I wanted. I didn't get much of an explanation in this sense, okay? And I'm looking for an explanation. So now I can go back in. Let me switch to a different model, and I'll go to Gemini 2.0 and go back to my workspace. And give Copilot a little bit more context. Right, so now I did explain, it dumped in comments in here that articulate why there's multiple froms and what they're doing. So now I can have comments built into my file to help other people out. And since there's multiple chunks here, I can accept from those. And what noticed here is I didn't ask for it, but it was intelligent enough to look at, I don't have any tests in here. as part of my project. I build the project, which is right here, but now we're actually building another a multi-layer or multi-statement or segment from Docker to have the test project run and build on that and generate log files, which is great. So I definitely want that, so I can include it. And then I can accept the documentation that puts in here, and there we go. So this is augmenting the files. Now I'm going to go and switch the difference between Copilot edits and Copilot chat. So I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did before. I'm going to go to Chat GPT, and I'm going to ask Copilot again, workspace explain, and we're just going to go this way. So I can select entry point, etc. I don't want to do that. Take it as the entire file. Now I get a very verbose description from an education and learning opportunity, the details of what and how and why this Docker file is built the way it is. Okay. So next, and the final example here from a learning perspective, or to help me deal with this, is now that I've got all this great code, I've tested it, I'm satisfied with it from a current standpoint, I'm ready to get this into a code repository. And still being, say, a junior developer, still new, I'm not completely familiar with working with Git. So now I can ask Copilot to give me the commands that I need to commit this code base and push it up to my repo. So I'm just going to go, and the difference here is instead of at workspace, I'm doing at GitHub and giving it context of the current file that I'm working on and explain the git CLI commands to commit all the new files, push changes locally, set the remote origin branch, and push to the remote origin. There we go. So now I can do a git add with a dot. And if I wanted to, I could take this, apply it in the editor. I have insert at cursor if I want to put in my code, and I can copy it. And I do have more commands. So I can insert this into the terminal. And let's see, am I in the right place? I am not in the right place. I'm at the root. I need to be in the repo of where we're at. Okay, yes, I am in the right place. Well, so I'll just redo the git.add here. Okay. Must be in, yes, I'm in the wrong place. Oh, it looks like I'm in the right place. All right, now I can do the git add. I was in the wrong place. Or am I on the wrong feature branch? All right. Anyway, I'm goofed up on the demo here about the branch I'm on and trying to do that. But again, the sense is I can do a git add all my files, do the commit message, place that commit message in. Then I can even go as far as asking Copilot generate a commit message for me. I can add the remote, and then I can push to the origin on the main branch or whatever branch I choose. In this case, it picked up main, but I would replace that with the appropriate branch. All right, so that's for the demo of Copilot. And again, going from, I don't want to say 0 to hero, but it did generate quite a bit of scaffolding work for me I have very detailed pieces in my services, etc. in here to get started. It's got everything I need, and it's stubbed in. So it looks like it's implementing an interface here. It defined the interface. I can add my methods for my interface, and it's got basic implementation based on the actual interface design. So if I look at iJob service, again, we can see how well that's been written out. Again, huge time saver. And the other key benefit here is having all these unit tests available for me. It generated a good git ignore for me, the Docker file, Docker compose, and best of yet, right, all the documentation that I would need to describe the project, how to get started with it, how to build the container, how to run the app, what are all the API endpoints. So this isn't quite Swagger documentation, but from a markdown and usability, and having that auto-generated for someone to pick up and start on the project that new is pretty incredible. All right, so with that, we'll go back and open up the session for some Q&A and discussion around our offer for the conclusion of the webinar today. So Joe, do you want to pick up and walk through what the offer is in detail?
Will do. So everybody, while I'm talking about the offer here really quick, if I'm pressing the right button here, you should see some polling pop up on your screen. Those are just some questions that we'd love to ask so we get a better understanding of where you're currently at on your journey. So really quickly, so for the offer, it's really based on three things here. It's really based on the understanding where you're at. So sitting down with probably myself and some of our program managers to understand where the communication plans are and what that really looks like for y'all moving forward. As well, the second part of that piece is the technical design. So how is GitHub Copilot actually going to be propagated within the organization? And we take some time with you all to understand the different business units in your organization and the different business problems you have to understand how we can actually propagate that throughout the organization. So again, that'll be a program manager, probably myself or one of the other principals on our team that'll be spending some time with individuals on your side of the house. So past that, we also have training. And we'll have our training organizer work with if you have a learning and development team at the business, or there's a smaller opportunity to have a discussion with y'all, we'd be more than happy to sit down and find out what custom modules or custom unique business cases to your fields that we can help you with. So that's really the offer, and there is a survey attached to that QR code. So if you want to pop that QR code open, you'll be directed to a landing page where you can fill in some more information if you're interested to talk with myself or David in the future about rolling out Copilot at your organization. So with that, I'll pass it back to David, and we'll go through some Q&A.
All right, thank you, Joe. So we'll hold here for a few minutes for folks to enter questions if you have any.
Looks like we've got a couple questions that have come in. So I believe I answered one of these in chat already, a question around the prompt engineering. Yeah, so GitHub has some great documentation around prompt engineering to help us. I know the question specifically was around unit tests, and we kind of went over that in the conversation today, but there's tons of really good documentation out there around prompt engineering. GitHub is quite a bit of it. Microsoft provides a lot of it too. You can feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to help you find some of those links and find some of that educational material to help get you the answers you need better while you're using AI. There was another question on here about older versions of Visual Studio. So as of right now, GitHub Copilot supports Visual Studio 2022. VS Code is up to date, and the oldest it goes back right now is Visual Studio 2022. I believe it's version 17. And kind of coinciding with that, the experience that you'll get in Visual Studio will be very similar to Visual Studio Code. There obviously will be potentially some changes in the interface, just as a separate product, but all the functionality should be there as well. I believe there's a question of sharing the recording. I believe that's something that we can, I believe that's something that will be posted on the website afterwards.
Oh.
And so for the security issues around the code, so the code is secured during transit and at rest. So all of the code is secured when using GitHub Copilot. And none of the code is trained on when using GitHub Copilot Enterprise and Copilot for Business. Just checking to see if there's any more questions coming in.
Yeah, and there's one here on the plugins for Copilot. Yes, they're very similar for VS Code and IntelliJ. They're pretty much same, just the UI experience is slightly different across each plugin or how the extension sits in the UI. But from a interaction standpoint, it should be identical, right? So the ability to use slash commands, specify specific participants or other shortcuts, etc., should be consistent across the tooling. And very good question on the compute or the energy. That's completely outside of our realm of understanding what that is. So some of these, when we think of those models, ChatGPT is a model. If you look at the Gemini one, that's a Google model. So Google would have that information in terms of, again, what it would take for the cost and energy for training the model. In terms of being able to provide the responses, typically a whole lot less. Again, that's how typical AI works. Most of the expense and compute is on the training side, whereas serving answers is a much slimmed down cost from a compute perspective. Hopefully that answered the question or touched on it enough. And the question is here is, given that Claude Sonnet 3.5 does a better job or seems to do a better job at generating new code, but ChatGPT 4.0 helps better on explaining, which model would you use when working with an existing code base with Copilot Chat? Depends on what you're trying to achieve out of that code base. So if I'm wanting more specific code suggestions, I would say working with Claude Sonnet or Gemini is typically going to give a better experience. So those models have a little bit more in-depth tuning and training to that type of scenario. So when we think of Gemini, right, it's even got models, the model training in there goes and has considerations for mathematics and I think potential science scenarios. Whereas ChatGPT is more focused on providing an experience around human language interpretation and restating that language for you from a suggestion and explanation standpoint. Then on the integrate with IntelliJ, and I'm not super familiar with IntelliJ integration. GitHub does publish what IDEs that are compatible or available for Copilot plugin or extensions. So I was just taking a quick look out to that direction.
I can answer that one really quick. So if you're asking specifically around the support of the plugin with GitHub Copilot, IntelliJ is supported in that respect. So I see a question come in here around the specific model with ChatGPT. So Copilot will specifically call out. So when you select the model you want to use, it specifically calls out which model it's using. And I currently believe the current model is ChatGPT 4.0 that it's currently using. I see in your, the example there mentioned 01 or mini. I believe it's 4.0 that it's using right now. It'll actually prompt you and let you know that that is the exact model when you go to do the selection. There is another question related to Bitbucket or other source control management systems and Copilot for Business using standalone licenses on the IDE. What additional help can you provide? So with Bitbucket as your source control management tool, as long as you're using the IDE that supports GitHub Copilot, you should be okay. There's also the option of using GitHub Enterprise and using Copilot in the browser. They're putting a lot more emphasis and a lot more functionality within your GitHub Copilot Enterprise tenant if you're using that as well as your source control if you have access to that. Just looking through remaining questions here. I don't see any more coming in. Give it just another minute here. If not, I think we can close out. Okay, not seeing any more. Not seeing any more questions rolling in here. So if we missed any, you can reach out to David or I through our emissary email addresses. And I would be more than happy to answer any more questions that were not answered here. We didn't get time to cover. So thank you all for attending the webinar today. Just remember that there's a survey and we also have that QR code. So please fill those out. Super helpful to us to understand your needs and how we can help you. That being said, I'll pass back to David for final goodbyes, and I think we're good.
All right, thank you, Joe. And thank you everyone for attending, much appreciated. And hopefully you found some of this information useful and help you on your continued journey around using GitHub Copilot and assisted AI.